The rain fell in heavy sheets across San Diego that October afternoon, turning the streets into rivers of grey water that rushed toward storm drains already overwhelmed by the downpour. Thunder rolled across the sky like distant artillery, and the wind howled through the narrow alleyways between buildings, carrying with it the salt-tinged scent of the Pacific Ocean just a few miles away. Inside the converted warehouse that served as the headquarters for Trident Security Solutions, 8 men sat around a large wooden table that had seen better days. The building itself was unremarkable from the outside, a nondescript structure in an industrial area of Coronado, but inside it had been transformed into a comfortable space where veterans could gather, share stories, and occasionally take on private security contracts that kept them connected to the world they had once known. The walls were decorated with photographs spanning decades of service, medals displayed in shadow boxes, and a large American flag that hung behind the bar area. The smell of coffee and gun oil hung in the air, mingling with the faint traces of cigar smoke that never quite seemed to leave the place, no matter how often they opened the windows. Marcus Cole sat at the head of the table, his massive frame barely contained by the reinforced chair beneath him. At 47 years old, his hair had gone completely grey, though his body remained as solid as it had been during his 23 years of service with the Navy SEALs. His face bore the weathered look of a man who had seen too much, with deep lines around his eyes and a scar that ran from his left temple to his jawline, a souvenir from a mission in Afghanistan that he never talked about. He stared at the cup of black coffee in front of him, watching the steam rise in lazy spirals toward the ceiling. The voices of his brothers, the men who had served alongside him through hell and back, washed over him like background noise. They were discussing a potential contract, something about providing security for a tech executive who had received threats, but Marcus found it difficult to focus on the details. His mind kept drifting back to the dream that had woken him at 3 a.m, the same dream that had haunted him for the past 6 years. The dusty streets of Kandahar, the screaming of children, the weight of a small body in his arms as he ran toward the evacuation helicopter. He could still feel the sticky warmth of blood soaking through his uniform, could still hear the voice of the little girl asking him in broken English why her mother was not moving. "Marcus, you still with us?" The voice belonged to Danny Rivera, a compact Puerto Rican man with a quick smile and quicker hands. He had served as Marcus's second-in-command for nearly a decade, and he knew better than anyone the demons that plagued his friend. His brown eyes held a mixture of concern and understanding as he studied Marcus's face. "Yeah, I'm here," Marcus replied, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate through the table. "Just thinking about the security protocols for the Hendricks job." Danny nodded, though his expression suggested he did not believe a word of it. "Tom was just saying we should probably have a 3-man rotation for the night shifts. What do you think?" Before Marcus could respond, the front door of the warehouse burst open with such force that it slammed against the wall and bounced back. Every man at the table was on his feet in an instant, hands moving toward weapons that were never far from reach. Years of training had made their responses automatic, their bodies moving before their minds had fully processed the potential threat. But what came through that door was not the enemy any of them had expected. It was a child, a little girl who could not have been more than 8 or 9 years old. She stood in the doorway, completely soaked from the rain, her dark hair plastered to her face in wet tangles. Her clothes, a thin pink jacket and jeans that were at least 2 sizes too big, clung to her small frame like a second skin. But it was her eyes that captured Marcus's attention and held it. They were wide with terror, the kind of primal fear that he had seen too many times in too many war zones. Tears streamed down her cheeks, mixing with the rainwater, and her entire body shook with sobs that seemed too powerful for such a small person to contain. "Please," she gasped, her voice barely audible above the sound of the storm outside. "Please, you have to help my mom. He's going to hurt her. Please, please, someone help." The men stood frozen for a moment, caught off guard by the sudden appearance of this desperate child in their midst. They had faced enemy combatants, survived ambushes, endured torture, but none of that had prepared them for the sight of this little girl standing before them, begging for their help. It was Marcus who moved first. He rose slowly from his chair, his movements deliberate and calm, despite the chaos that had just invaded their sanctuary. The other men watched as he walked around the table, his heavy boots making almost no sound on the concrete floor. He had always moved like that, like a predator, even when he was not hunting. He crossed the room and knelt down in front of the little girl, bringing himself to her eye level. Up close he could see the bruise forming on her left cheek, could see the way she flinched when he raised his hand. He stopped, letting his hand hover in the air between them, waiting for her to make the choice to trust him. "Hey there," he said softly, his deep voice gentler than any of his brothers had ever heard it. "My name is Marcus. Can you tell me your name?" The little girl sniffled, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "Lily," she whispered. "Lily Martinez." "That's a beautiful name, Lily. I need you to take a deep breath for me, okay? Can you do that?" She nodded, her small chest heaving as she tried to follow his instructions. Marcus waited patiently, his eyes never leaving hers, providing an anchor of calm in the storm of her fear. "Good girl. Now I need you to tell me what happened. Who is going to hurt your mom?" "My stepdad," Lily said, the words tumbling out in a rush now that she had started. "His name is Victor. He came home drunk again, and he started yelling at Mom. He's been hitting her for months, but tonight is different. He has a gun. I saw it. He said he was going to make sure she never left him. Mom told me to run, to get help. I didn't know where to go, but I saw the flag outside, and I thought maybe there were soldiers here who could help. Please, mister, please. My mom is all I have. I can't lose her, please." Marcus felt something shift inside his chest, something that had been frozen solid for years, beginning to crack. He looked at this little girl, at the fear and desperation in her eyes, and he saw another child from another time, another place. He saw the ghost that had haunted his dreams for 6 years, and he made a decision that would change everything. He turned to look at Danny, who was already pulling out his phone. "Get me everything you can on Victor Martinez. Address, criminal history, known associates. I want it in 5 minutes. Danny nodded and stepped away, his fingers flying over the screen. The other men had already begun to move, years of operating as a unit making words unnecessary. Tom Chen, a former sniper with hands as steady as stone, was checking his weapon. Jake Morrison, their medic, was already packing his trauma kit. Chris and Mike, the twins who had served together since basic training, were pulling tactical vests from the equipment locker. Marcus turned back to Lily, still kneeling before her. "Lily, I need you to stay here with my friend Danny, okay? He's going to keep you safe while we go help your mom. Can you be brave for me?" Lily grabbed his hand with both of hers, her grip surprisingly strong for such a small child. "You're going to save her? You promise?" Marcus looked into her eyes, and for the first time in years he felt something other than the cold emptiness that had become his constant companion. He felt purpose. He felt the weight of a promise he was about to make, knowing that breaking it would destroy what little remained of his soul. "I promise you, Lily, I'm going to bring your mom home safe." He stood up and turned to face his team. These men had followed him into hell more times than he could count. They had trusted him with their lives, and he had never let them down. But this was different. This was not a sanctioned mission, not a contract with legal protections and rules of engagement. This was a choice, and it had to be theirs to make. "Listen up," he said, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had led men into battle. "This is not our fight. There's no contract, no payment, no legal cover. If this goes wrong, we could all end up in prison. I'm going, but I won't order any of you to come with me. This has to be your choice." One by one, his brothers stepped forward. Danny was first, pocketing his phone as he moved to stand at Marcus's right shoulder. "You think I'm going to let you have all the fun, old man? I've got the address, 3 blocks from here, apartment complex on 5th and Harbour." Tom was next, his sniper rifle already assembled and resting against his shoulder. "Been a while since I did something that actually mattered. Count me in." Jake, Chris, Mike and the others fell in line, each of them carrying the same look of determination. They were warriors, bred for battle, and they had found a cause worth fighting for. Marcus nodded, a rare smile touching the corners of his mouth. "Then let's move. Danny, you stay here with the girl. Keep her safe and call the police. Tell them everything. We might need backup if this goes sideways." Danny started to protest, but Marcus cut him off with a look. "Someone has to protect her. There's no one I trust more than you." Danny held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded. "Bring her mother back safe, Marcus, and try not to get yourself killed. Again." Marcus clapped him on the shoulder and turned toward the door. The storm outside had not let up. If anything, it had intensified, but he barely noticed the rain as it soaked through his clothes. His mind was already running through scenarios, calculating risks, planning approaches. He was back in the zone, the place where everything else fell away and only the mission remained. They moved through the streets like shadows, their years of training evident in every step. The apartment complex came into view within minutes, a run-down building that had seen better days. Paint peeled from the walls, and several windows were boarded up with plywood. It was the kind of place where people went when they had nowhere else to go, where dreams came to die and hope was a luxury no one could afford. Marcus signaled for his team to spread out, covering the exits. Tom took position across the street, finding a vantage point that gave him a clear line of sight to the third-floor window that Danny's research had identified as the Martinez apartment. The others fanned out, each taking a strategic position that would allow them to respond to any scenario. Marcus himself approached the front entrance, his senses heightened to an almost painful degree. He could hear the rain hammering against the metal awning above him, could smell the garbage overflowing from the dumpster in the alley, could feel the adrenaline starting to course through his veins like liquid fire. The security door was broken, hanging open on rusted hinges. He slipped inside, moving up the stairs with his back against the wall, his weapon drawn and ready. The hallway on the third floor was dimly lit, the fluorescent lights flickering erratically, casting strange shadows on the water-stained walls. He could hear them now. A man's voice, loud and angry, slurred with alcohol. A woman's voice, pleading, terrified. And something else, a sound that made his blood run cold. The unmistakable click of a gun being cocked. Marcus pressed his ear against the door of apartment 312, his heart pounding in his chest. Inside, Victor Martinez was ranting, his words barely coherent but his intent crystal clear. He was going to kill her. He was going to kill his wife, and then he was going to find the little girl who had run away, and he was going to kill her too. Not today, Marcus thought. Not on my watch. He kicked in the door with one powerful blow, the frame splintering under the force of his boot. The scene inside was exactly what he had expected and feared. A woman, Maria Martinez, was on the floor, her face bloody and swollen, her arms raised in a futile attempt to protect herself. Standing over her was Victor, a large man with a beer gut and mean eyes, a revolver clutched in his shaking hand. Victor spun at the sound of the door crashing open, his gun swinging toward this new threat. But he was drunk and slow, and Marcus was neither of those things. In one fluid motion, Marcus closed the distance between them, grabbed Victor's gun hand and twisted. The revolver clattered to the floor as Victor screamed in pain, his wrist bent at an unnatural angle. Marcus did not stop there. He drove his elbow into Victor's face, feeling the satisfying crunch of cartilage as the man's nose broke. Victor stumbled backward, his hands flying to his face, blood pouring between his fingers. Marcus followed, delivering a precise strike to the solar plexus that doubled Victor over, then a knee to the chin that sent him sprawling to the floor, unconscious. The entire confrontation had taken less than 10 seconds. Marcus stood over the fallen man, his chest heaving, his hands trembling with a rage he could barely contain. He wanted to hurt this man, wanted to make him feel every ounce of pain he had inflicted on his wife and stepdaughter. He wanted to kill him. But then he heard a soft whimper, and he turned to see Maria Martinez staring at him with wide, terrified eyes. She was beautiful despite the bruises, with the same dark hair and delicate features as her daughter. She was clutching her arm, which hung at an odd angle, clearly broken. The rage drained out of Marcus like water from a sieve. He was not here to deliver vengeance. He was here to save a life. He holstered his weapon and approached Maria slowly, his hands raised to show he meant no harm. "Mrs. Martinez, my name is Marcus. Your daughter Lily sent me. She's safe, and I'm here to take you to her." Maria's eyes filled with tears at the mention of her daughter's name. "Lily! Lily is safe? Oh, thank God, thank God!" She tried to stand but collapsed back to the floor, the pain of her injuries too much to overcome. Marcus caught her before she could fall, scooping her up in his arms as gently as if she were made of glass. "I've got you," he said softly. "You're safe now. It's over." He carried her out of the apartment, past the neighbors who had emerged from their doors to see what the commotion was about, past the police cars that were just pulling up outside, lights flashing in the rain. Jake was there waiting, his medical kit already open, ready to provide first aid. Marcus handed Maria over to his care and stepped back, watching as Jake worked to stabilize her injuries. The other members of his team were dealing with the police, explaining the situation, showing their credentials, making calls to contacts who could smooth over any legal complications. But Marcus barely noticed any of it. His mind was elsewhere, back in the warehouse where a little girl was waiting, where a promise had been made. He had saved Maria Martinez, but something else had happened tonight, something he had not expected. For the first time in 6 years, Marcus Cole felt alive. The ambulance arrived within minutes, its red and blue lights cutting through the rain like beacons of hope. Paramedics swarmed around Maria, working with practiced efficiency to load her onto a stretcher and into the waiting vehicle. Marcus stood apart from the chaos, his wet clothes clinging to his body, watching as the woman he had saved was taken away to safety. "She's going to be okay," Jake said, coming to stand beside him. "Broken arm, some cracked ribs, a lot of bruising, but nothing that won't heal. You got there just in time." Marcus nodded, but his mind was already moving on to the next problem. What about Victor? Police have him in custody. Between Maria's injuries and Lily's testimony, he's looking at a long time behind bars: assault with a deadly weapon, domestic violence, child endangerment. The list goes on. "Good." Marcus turned away from the ambulance and started walking back toward the warehouse. "I need to see Lily. I made her a promise." Jake fell into step beside him, not saying anything but providing silent support. The rain was beginning to let up, the storm finally moving on to torment some other part of the city. The streets glistened under the streetlights, reflecting the neon signs of the bars and shops that lined the waterfront. They walked in silence for several blocks before Jake finally spoke. "You know, that's the first time I've seen you like that in years." Marcus glanced at him. "Like what?" "Alive. Present. Like you actually gave a damn about something." Jake shook his head, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "It was good to see, Marcus. I was starting to worry about you." Marcus did not respond. He was not ready to examine what had happened tonight, not ready to acknowledge the crack that had formed in the wall he had built around his heart. But Jake was right. Something had changed. Something had broken free. They reached the warehouse to find Danny pacing back and forth in front of the door, his phone pressed to his ear. He looked up when he saw them approaching, relief flooding his features. "They're back," he said into the phone. "I'll call you later." He hung up and jogged over to meet them. "Thank God. Lily's been asking about you non-stop. I told her everything was going to be okay, but she wouldn't believe me until she saw you." Marcus pushed past him and entered the warehouse. The other men had not yet returned, still dealing with the aftermath at the apartment complex, so the large space was quiet and empty, except for a small figure sitting on the couch near the fireplace. Lily looked up when she heard the door open, and her face transformed from anxiety to overwhelming joy. She leaped off the couch and ran toward Marcus, her bare feet slapping against the concrete floor. She threw herself at him with such force that he had to take a step back to keep his balance. "You came back!" she cried, her small arms wrapping around his waist with surprising strength. "You came back! Is my mom okay? Did you save her? Where is she?" Marcus knelt down, bringing himself to her eye level once again. Her face was still tear-stained, but her eyes were bright with hope now, instead of fear. He placed his hands on her shoulders and looked at her with an intensity that made her fall silent. "Your mum is safe, Lily. She's going to be okay. The doctors are taking care of her right now, and as soon as she's feeling better, she'll come see you. I promise." Lily's lower lip trembled, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. But these were different tears, tears of relief and gratitude and overwhelming emotion. She threw her arms around Marcus's neck and buried her face in his shoulder, her small body shaking with sobs. Marcus held her, one hand cradling the back of her head, the other wrapped around her thin shoulders. He closed his eyes and felt something warm, spreading through his chest, something that felt dangerously like hope. This was why he had become a soldier. This was why he had sacrificed so much, endured so much, not for medals or glory, but for moments like this, for the chance to make a difference, to save a life, to give a little girl her mother back. When Lily finally pulled away, she looked up at him with eyes that were too old for her young face. "Thank you, Marcus. Thank you for saving my mom. You're my hero." The word hit him like a physical blow. Hero. He had been called that before, more times than he could count. But it had never felt true, not really. Not when he had watched friends die in his arms, not when he had failed to save the ones who mattered most. But looking into Lily's eyes, seeing the gratitude and trust reflected there, he thought that maybe, just maybe, he could start to believe it. "You're pretty brave yourself, Lily," he said, managing a small smile. "Not many people would have the courage to run out into a storm looking for help. Your mom is lucky to have you." Lily smiled back, and for a moment the warehouse seemed brighter, warmer, as if her joy was a tangible thing that could chase away the shadows. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. The police came to take Lily's statement, handling her with kid gloves, thanks to some phone calls from Marcus's contacts. Social services arrived, and Marcus had to fight the urge to throw them out when they started talking about foster care and temporary placements. "She stays with us," he said flatly, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Until her mother is released from the hospital, she stays here. We have the resources to care for her, and she's been through enough trauma without being shipped off to strangers." The social worker, a thin woman with sharp eyes and a clipboard that seemed permanently attached to her hand, looked like she wanted to argue. But something in Marcus's expression made her think better of it. She made some notes, asked a few more questions, and finally agreed to a temporary arrangement pending Maria's recovery. As the night wore on, and the other members of the team returned from dealing with the aftermath, The warehouse took on an atmosphere that Marcus had not felt in years. There was warmth here, and purpose, and something that felt almost like family. The men doted on Lily, bringing her blankets and hot chocolate, telling her stories of their adventures that were heavily edited for young ears. Danny sat beside Marcus at the table, watching the scene with a knowing smile. "You did a good thing tonight, brother." Marcus shook his head. "We did a good thing. Couldn't have done it without the team." "True, but you were the one who decided to help. You were the one who made Lily feel safe." Danny paused, choosing his next words carefully. "I haven't seen you like this since before Kandahar. It's good. It's really good." Marcus did not respond, but his eyes drifted to where Lily had fallen asleep on the couch, wrapped in one of Tom's military blankets. She looked so small, so vulnerable, so trusting. She had no idea what kind of man he really was, what he had done, what he had failed to do. She just saw someone who had helped her when she needed it most. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was all anyone could ask for. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having moved on during the night to leave behind a city washed clean and sparkling in the autumn sunlight. Marcus had not slept. He had spent the night in the chair beside the couch, watching over Lily, his mind too full of thoughts to allow for rest. Around 7 in the morning his phone rang. It was the hospital informing him that Maria Martinez was awake and asking for her daughter. Marcus woke Lily as gently as he could, trying not to startle her. "Hey, sleepyhead, your mom is awake. She wants to see you." Lily was instantly alert, her eyes bright with excitement. "Really? Can we go now? Please?" Marcus smiled, a genuine expression that felt strange on his face. "Get your shoes on. We'll leave in 5 minutes." The drive to the hospital was quiet, with Lily pressed against the window, watching the city pass by with eager eyes. She had never been to San Diego before, she told Marcus. Victor had moved them here 6 months ago, after he lost his job in Phoenix. Things had gotten worse since then. He had always been mean, but the drinking had made him dangerous. Marcus listened without interrupting, his hands tight on the steering wheel. He had seen this pattern before, too many times. Abusers isolating their victims, cutting them off from support systems, making them dependent and afraid. It was a kind of warfare, and Maria had been fighting it alone for years. They arrived at the hospital and made their way to Maria's room on the 3rd floor. Marcus hung back as Lily burst through the door, her small body a blur of motion as she threw herself onto the bed and into her mother's arms. "Mommy, Mommy, I missed you so much." Maria's face, still bruised and swollen, transformed with pure joy as she held her daughter close. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but she was smiling, laughing, showering Lily with kisses. "My brave girl," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "My brave, beautiful girl. You saved me, baby. You saved both of us." Marcus stood in the doorway, feeling like an intruder on this intimate moment. He started to turn away, to give them privacy, but Maria's voice stopped him. "Please, don't go. You're the one who saved us. The least I can do is thank you properly." He stepped into the room, uncomfortable with the gratitude in her eyes. "You don't need to thank me, Mrs. Martinez. Anyone would have done the same." Maria shook her head, a sad smile on her face. "No, they wouldn't. I've been asking for help for years. The police, social services, even my own family. No one wanted to get involved. No one wanted to risk anything." She reached out and took his hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "You risked everything to save a stranger. That's not nothing. That's everything." Marcus did not know what to say. He had spent so long seeing himself as a failure, as someone who had let down the people who depended on him, that he did not know how to accept praise. He mumbled something about just doing his job, and retreated to the corner of the room, watching as mother and daughter caught up on everything that had happened. Over the next several days, Marcus found himself spending more and more time at the hospital. He told himself it was just to check on Maria's recovery, to make sure Lily was adjusting, to handle the logistical details that needed attention. But the truth was something more complicated, something he was not ready to examine too closely. Maria was released after 5 days, her arm in a cast and her ribs wrapped but otherwise on the mend. The question of where she and Lily would go became the subject of much debate among the team. They could not go back to the apartment, that much was certain. Victor might be in jail, but he had friends, and the lease was in his name anyway. It was Danny who came up with the solution. "I have a friend who owns a couple of rental properties in the suburbs. Nice neighborhood, good schools. I can talk to him, see if he's got anything available." "That's very kind," Maria said, her voice hesitant. "But I don't have any money. Victor controlled everything. I don't even have access to my own bank account." "Don't worry about the money," Marcus said, surprising himself with the words. "We'll figure it out. The important thing is getting you and Lily somewhere safe." And so it was arranged. Within a week, Maria and Lily were settled into a small but comfortable house in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. The team pitched in to furnish it, each man contributing what he could from his own savings or resources. Tom found a job for Maria at a friend's restaurant, a place where she could work flexible hours and keep an eye on Lily. Jake made sure she had follow-up appointments scheduled for her injuries. Chris and Mike installed a security system that would have been the envy of Fort Knox. Marcus found himself visiting more often than he should. He would show up on his days off with groceries or small gifts for Lily, toys or books that he thought she might like. He would stay for dinner, helping Maria in the kitchen while Lily did her homework at the table. He would read Lily bedtime stories, his deep voice somehow suited to the task, bringing the characters to life in ways that made her laugh. It was Danny who finally called him out on it. They were at the warehouse, just the two of them, sharing a bottle of whiskey as the sun set over the bay. "You're falling for her," Danny said. Not a question, but a statement of fact. Marcus did not bother denying it. "It's complicated." "It's not complicated at all, brother. You're just afraid." Danny poured another drink and pushed it across the table. "I've known you for 15 years. I've seen you face things that would break most men without flinching. But this scares you." "Why?" Marcus stared into his glass, watching the amber liquid catch the fading light. "Because I don't deserve her. Either of them. You know what I've done, Danny. You know what happened in Kandahar. I know you did everything you could to save that little girl and her mother. I know you carried them both to the evac point while taking fire from 3 different positions. I know that mother survived because of you. And the daughter didn't." The words came out flat, dead, stripped of all emotion. "She died in my arms, Danny, 8 years old, same age as Lily, and I couldn't save her." Danny was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft but firm. "That wasn't your fault. The shrapnel wound was too severe. Nothing could have saved her, not even a fully equipped hospital. You gave her comfort in her final moments. You made sure she didn't die alone. That matters, Marcus. That matters more than you know. Tell that to her ghost." Marcus drained his glass and poured another. "She visits me every night. Asks me why I didn't save her. Asks me why I'm still here when she's not." Danny reached across the table and grabbed Marcus's wrist, forcing him to meet his eyes. "That's survivor's guilt talking. It's not real, Marcus. That little girl wouldn't want you to spend the rest of your life punishing yourself for something that wasn't your fault. You don't know that. I do know that, because I know you, and I know that girl's mother has been trying to reach you for years to thank you for saving her life, for giving her daughter a chance to know peace at the end." Danny released his grip and sat back. "You've been running from the past for 6 years. Maybe it's time to stop running and start living." Marcus did not respond. He sat in silence as the last rays of sunlight disappeared below the horizon, thinking about what Danny had said, about Maria and Lily, about the little girl in Kandahar, about the man he had been and the man he was becoming. Maybe it was time to stop running. Maybe it was time to let himself hope again. The breakthrough came on a Sunday afternoon, 3 weeks after the night that had changed everything. Marcus was at Maria's house, helping Lily with a school project about community heroes. She had chosen to write about him, despite his protests that he was not a hero, just a guy who did his job. "But you saved my mom," Lily insisted, her crayon hovering over the poster board. "You came when nobody else would. That makes you a hero in my book." Marcus was trying to think of a response when the doorbell rang. Maria went to answer it, and Marcus heard her gasp from the entryway. He was on his feet instantly, his hand moving toward the weapon that was not there, his body tensing for confrontation. But the woman who walked into the living room was not a threat. She was small, middle-aged, with dark hair streaked with grey and eyes that held a sadness so deep it seemed bottomless. She looked at Marcus, and tears began to stream down her face. "It's really you," she whispered. "After all these years, I finally found you." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. He knew this woman. He had seen her face in photographs, in memories, in dreams. She was the mother from Kandahar, the one he had carried to safety along with her dying daughter, the one who had sent letters to military addresses that he had never opened, never answered, never acknowledged. "Mrs. Ihmadi," he managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper, "please call me Fatima." She took a step toward him, then another, until she was standing close enough to touch. "I have been searching for you for 6 years. I had to thank you. I had to tell you." "Tell me what?" She took his hands in hers, her grip surprisingly strong. "That my daughter's death was not your fault. That you gave us both a gift that night, a gift of courage and compassion and sacrifice. You carried us to safety when no one else would. You held my Yasmin as she passed, and you made sure she knew she was loved, that she was not alone." Marcus felt something break inside him, a dam that had been holding back 6 years of grief and guilt and pain. His legs gave out and he sank to his knees, his body shaking with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than his soul. Fatima knelt beside him, holding him as he wept, murmuring words of comfort in a mixture of English and Dari. Maria watched from the doorway, tears in her own eyes, while Lily sat frozen on the couch, not understanding what was happening but sensing its importance. When Marcus finally regained control of himself, he looked at Fatima with eyes that were red and swollen, but somehow clearer than they had been in years. "How can you forgive me?" he asked. "I failed her. I failed you." Fatima shook her head firmly. "There is nothing to forgive. You did not fail us. You saved us. Both of us." She reached into her bag and pulled out a worn photograph, the edges soft from handling. It showed a little girl with dark hair and bright eyes, smiling at the camera. "This is my Yasmin. She was full of life, full of joy. But she was also very sick. She had a condition, something wrong with her heart. The doctors in Kabul said she would not live to see her 10th birthday." She pressed the photograph into Marcus's hands. "When the bombing happened, when our house was destroyed, Yasmin was hurt very badly. But even if she had not been, even if we had been somewhere safe, she would not have lived much longer. The shrapnel just made it faster. Less painful, maybe. The doctor at the military hospital told me that she would have suffered much more if she had lived." Marcus stared at the photograph, at the face of the little girl who had haunted his dreams for so long. He had never known this. He had never thought to ask, never wanted to know the details. He had just assumed that he had failed, that his inability to save her was proof of his inadequacy. "I didn't know," he whispered. "How could you? You did not have time to ask questions. You only had time to act, and you acted with bravery and compassion. Fatima touched his face gently. Yasmin spoke of you in her final moments. She called you her guardian angel. She said you made her feel safe. That is the greatest gift you could have given her. Something inside Marcus shifted, settled, found peace. He would always carry the memory of that night, would always feel the weight of the losses he had witnessed. But the crushing guilt, the certainty that he had failed, began to loosen its grip on his heart. He looked at Maria, standing in the doorway with tears streaming down her face. He looked at Lily, watching with wide eyes from the couch. And he looked at Fatima, this woman who had traveled halfway around the world to offer him forgiveness he had never sought. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you for finding me, for telling me." Fatima smiled, and for a moment she looked almost peaceful. "Thank you for giving me the chance to say goodbye to my daughter properly, for giving her peace in her final moments. That is something I can never repay." She stayed for dinner that night, sharing stories of Yasmin with Maria and Lily, laughing and crying in equal measure. Marcus mostly listened, adding details when asked, filling in gaps that only he could fill. By the end of the evening, something had changed. The weight he had carried for so long had not disappeared, but it had shifted, transformed into something more bearable. When Fatima finally left, with promises to stay in touch and invitations to visit her home in Canada, where she had resettled after the war, Marcus walked her to her car. The night was cool and clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on velvet. "You have found a new family," Fatima said, looking back at the house where Maria and Lily waited. "That is good. Yasmin would have wanted that for you. She was always telling me that her guardian angel looked sad and that she wished she could make him smile." Marcus followed her gaze, watching as Lily pressed her face against the window, waving goodbye. "I'm starting to think that maybe I can. Smile, I mean, with them." Fatima nodded and got into her car. Before she closed the door, she looked up at him one last time. "Be happy, Marcus Cole. You have earned it." He watched her drive away, her taillights disappearing into the night. Then he turned and walked back toward the house, toward the light spilling from the windows, toward the woman and child who were waiting for him inside. For the first time in 6 years, Marcus Cole was ready to come home. The months that followed were not easy. Recovery never is, whether from physical wounds or the wounds of the heart. Marcus still had nightmares, still woke in cold sweats with the sounds of gunfire and screaming children echoing in his ears. But now when he woke, he was not alone. Maria was there, her hand on his chest, her voice soft in the darkness. "I'm here," she would say. "You're safe. We're all safe." And slowly, gradually, he began to believe her. His relationship with Maria developed naturally, without pressure or expectation. They were two broken people who had found each other, who understood each other's pain without needing it to be explained. They talked for hours, sharing stories of their pasts, their fears, their hopes for the future. They laughed together, cried together, healed together. Lily took to Marcus with an enthusiasm that surprised everyone, most of all Marcus himself. She started calling him Uncle Marcus, then just Marcus. Then one day, about 4 months after they had met, she looked up at him with those big dark eyes and asked if she could call him Dad. Marcus had no words. He looked at Maria, who was watching with tears in her eyes and a smile on her face, and then back at Lily. This little girl who had run into his life on a rainy night, who had cracked open the wall around his heart, who had given him back his sense of purpose. She wanted him to be her father. "I would like that very much," he managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. "I would be honored." Lily threw herself into his arms, and Maria joined them, and for a moment they were just a family, three people who had found each other against all odds, who had chosen to love each other despite the risks. The team at Trident Security Solutions became honorary uncles, each of them taking a special interest in Lily's welfare. Tom taught her how to play chess, discovering a sharp tactical mind that reminded him of her new father. Jake made sure she stayed healthy, scheduling regular checkups and teaching her about nutrition. Danny became her confidant, the one she came to when she needed advice about friends or school or the complicated business of growing up. Chris and Mike, the twins, appointed themselves her personal entertainment committee, organizing outings to the zoo, the beach, the movies. They spoiled her shamelessly, and Marcus pretended to disapprove, even though everyone knew he loved seeing her happy. Victor Martinez was sentenced to 12 years in prison for aggravated assault, domestic violence, and weapons charges. The day the verdict came in, Maria cried for hours, not from sadness, but from relief. A chapter of her life was finally, definitively closed. She could move forward without looking over her shoulder, without wondering when he might come back. Marcus proposed on a warm evening in late spring, almost 8 months after they had first met. They were on the beach, watching the sunset, while Lily built sandcastles nearby. He had not planned to do it that night, had not even bought a ring yet, but the moment felt right, and the words just came out. "Marry me," he said simply. "Be my wife. Let me be a real father to Lily. Let me spend the rest of my life making you both happy." Maria looked at him with eyes full of love, full of trust, full of hope. "Yes," she said, and that was all she needed to say. The wedding was small, held at the warehouse that had become their second home. The team stood as groomsmen, Danny serving as best man. Lily was the flower girl, scattering rose petals with more enthusiasm than precision. Maria wore a simple white dress that made her look like an angel, and Marcus wore his dress uniform for the first time in years, the medals on his chest catching the light. Fatima Ahmadi flew in from Canada to attend, sitting in the front row with tears of joy streaming down her face. She had become a regular part of their lives, a grandmother figure to Lily and a dear friend to Maria. Her presence at the wedding felt right, a blessing from the past that made the future seem brighter. The vows they wrote themselves were simple but sincere. Marcus promised to protect and cherish Maria for as long as he lived. Maria promised to stand by Marcus through whatever challenges lay ahead. And then, in a surprise that had the whole room in tears, Lily was invited to the altar to make a promise of her own. "I promise to be the best daughter ever," she said, reading from a crumpled piece of paper she had hidden in her flower basket. "I promise to do my homework and clean my room and not eat too many cookies. And I promise to love my mom and my dad forever and ever, no matter what." Marcus had to take a moment to compose himself before he could continue with the ceremony. This little girl had walked into his life and changed everything, had reminded him what it meant to be alive, to have purpose, to love and be loved in return. She was the greatest gift he had ever received. The reception that followed was loud and joyful, full of laughter and stories and bad dancing. The team took turns on the dance floor with Maria, each of them moving with more enthusiasm than skill. Marcus sat at the head table with Lily, watching his new wife being spun around by Tom, and felt a warmth in his chest that he had thought was gone forever. "Are you happy, Dad?" Lily asked, looking up at him with those big dark eyes. "Yes, sweetheart," he said, pulling her close. "I'm very happy." "Good. Because Mom says we're going to have a baby brother or sister soon, and she wanted to make sure you were ready." Marcus froze, his brain struggling to process what she had just said. He looked across the room to where Maria had stopped dancing and was watching him with a nervous smile on her face, her hand resting on her stomach. "She wanted to wait until after the wedding to tell you," Lily continued, oblivious to his shock. But I'm not very good at keeping secrets. Oops. Maria made her way to the table, her eyes searching his face for his reaction. "Surprise," she said, her voice small and uncertain. Marcus stood up, took her face in his hands, and kissed her with a passion that made the entire room cheer. When he finally pulled away, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "A baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "We're having a baby. You're not upset?" "Upset? Maria, this is the greatest day of my life." He pulled her into his arms, holding her close, feeling the slight swell of her belly against him. "I love you. I love Lily. And I love this little person already." The news spread through the crowd like wildfire, and soon Marcus was being clapped on the back by his brothers, each of them offering congratulations and unsolicited advice about fatherhood. Danny produced a bottle of expensive champagne from somewhere, and the toasts seemed to go on forever. But Marcus barely heard any of it. His attention was focused on the two people who mattered most: his wife and his daughter, his family. The family he had never thought he would have. The family he had been so afraid to want. That night, after the guests had gone and the warehouse had been cleaned up, Marcus sat on the roof and looked up at the stars. Maria was asleep in the bedroom downstairs, exhausted from the day's events. Lily was in her room, probably still too excited to sleep, but trying her best. Danny found him there, climbing up through the skylight with 2 beers in hand. He settled beside Marcus and handed him one without comment. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the distant sounds of the city, watching the lights of ships moving across the bay. "Hell of a year," Danny finally said. Marcus nodded. "Hell of a year. You know, I never thought I'd see the day. Marcus Cole, married with a kid and another on the way. If someone had told me that a year ago, I would have laughed in their face." "Me too." Marcus took a long drink of his beer. "But here we are. Here we are." Danny turned to look at him, his expression serious. "I'm proud of you, brother. What you did, opening yourself up again after everything you've been through, that took courage. Real courage." Marcus shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "I didn't have much choice. Lily kind of crashed into my life and didn't give me any option but to care." "That's not true, and you know it. You could have called the cops and walked away. You could have helped them that night and then gone back to your life, never seeing them again. But you didn't. You chose to stay. You chose to love them. That's all you, Marcus." Marcus did not respond, but he knew Danny was right. He had made a choice that night, standing in the warehouse looking at a terrified little girl. He had chosen to help, to care, to let someone else in after years of keeping the world at arm's length. And it had been the best choice he had ever made. The baby arrived 7 months later, on a cold January morning that turned warm and bright the moment Marcus heard his son's first cry. They named him Daniel Thomas Cole, after the 2 men who had stood by Marcus through everything, Danny Rivera and Tom Chen. Little Daniel was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, a shock of dark hair that stood up in all directions, and lungs that could wake the dead. He was demanding and difficult, and the most beautiful thing Marcus had ever seen. Lily was instantly smitten with her new brother, appointing herself his primary protector and entertainer. She would spend hours in his nursery, talking to him, singing to him, showing him her toys and books. When he cried, she was often the first one there, patting his back and telling him that everything was going to be okay. Marcus would sometimes stand in the doorway and watch them together, his heart so full it felt like it might burst. This was his family. These people were his. The thought still amazed him, even after everything that had happened. The nightmares faded over time, though they never disappeared entirely. Marcus learned to accept them as part of his journey, shadows of a past that had shaped him but did not define him. When they came, Maria was there to hold him, and in the morning Lily and Daniel were there to remind him of all the reasons he had to live. He continued to work with Trident Security Solutions, but the nature of the work changed. Instead of taking high-risk contracts that put him in danger, he focused on training and consulting, passing on his knowledge to a new generation of operators. He found satisfaction in teaching, in watching young men and women develop the skills they would need to protect others. The team remained close, bound by something stronger than blood. They gathered at the warehouse every Sunday for dinner, a tradition that had started informally and become sacred. Maria would cook, the men would argue about sports and politics, and the children would run around causing chaos that no one really minded. As Daniel grew from infant to toddler to curious child, the team became his family too. Danny was his favorite, always ready with a joke or a game, but he loved them all in his own way. Tom taught him to be patient, Jake taught him to be kind, Chris and Mike taught him that laughter was the best medicine for any problem. Lily flourished in ways that Maria had hardly dared to hope. The scared, traumatized little girl who had run through a storm to find help became a confident, compassionate young woman. She excelled in school, made friends easily, and developed a passion for helping others that reminded Marcus of himself at her age. When she was 12, she announced that she wanted to volunteer at a local shelter for domestic violence survivors. Maria hesitated, worried about exposing her to painful memories, but Marcus supported the idea. "She wants to help people like you were helped," he told Maria. "That's a beautiful thing. We should encourage it." And so Lily began volunteering, spending her weekends listening to women and children who had been through experiences similar to her own. She brought them hope, living proof that life could get better, that there was happiness on the other side of the darkness. Marcus visited the shelter sometimes, helping with security assessments and self-defense classes. The women there looked at him with a mixture of awe and gratitude, this giant of a man who had dedicated his life to protecting others. He never got used to it, never felt comfortable with the hero worship, but he understood that his presence meant something to them. One evening, as they were driving home from the shelter, Lily asked Marcus a question that caught him off guard. "Dad, do you ever regret it, helping us that night?" Marcus glanced at her in the rearview mirror, surprised. "What do you mean?" "I mean, your life was simpler before we came along. You didn't have to worry about anyone but yourself. Now you have me and Daniel and Mom, and sometimes I think that must be really hard for you." Marcus pulled the car to the side of the road and turned to face her. "Lily, look at me." She met his eyes, and he saw the vulnerability there, the fear that she was somehow a burden. "Before you came into my life, I was surviving, not living. I went through the motions, did my job, came home to an empty apartment. I thought I didn't deserve anything more than that. I thought I was broken beyond repair." He reached out and took her hand. "Then you showed up, this brave little girl who had run through a storm to save her mother. You looked at me and asked for help, and something inside me woke up, something that had been asleep for a very long time. You're not broken, Dad. No, I'm not. Not anymore. And that's because of you. Because of your mom. Because of Daniel. You all saved me just as much as I saved you that night." He squeezed her hand gently. "I don't regret a single moment. This family is the best thing that ever happened to me." Lily's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "I love you, Dad. I love you too, sweetheart, always and forever." They drove the rest of the way home in comfortable silence, father and daughter, connected by bonds that went deeper than biology. That night, Marcus sat in the nursery rocking Daniel to sleep. The little boy was fighting it as always, his eyes heavy but determined to stay open. Marcus hummed a tuneless melody, something he had picked up somewhere along the way, and eventually Daniel's eyes closed and his breathing deepened into sleep. Maria appeared in the doorway, watching them with a soft smile. "You're good at that." "I've had practice," Marcus carefully placed Daniel in his crib and covered him with a blanket. "He's stubborn, this one. He gets it from his father." Marcus crossed to her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "I prefer to call it determination." Maria laughed and leaned into him. "Call it whatever you want. It's still stubbornness." They stood there for a while, holding each other, listening to the soft sounds of their son sleeping. The house was quiet, peaceful, filled with the kind of love that Marcus had once thought was beyond his reach. "I had a visitor at work today," Maria said eventually. "A woman who just got out of a bad situation. She has a little girl about the same age Lily was." Marcus nodded, already knowing where this was going. And she needs help. More help than the shelter can provide. She needs somewhere safe to stay while she gets on her feet." He looked at his wife, at the compassion in her eyes, at the kindness that had drawn him to her from the very beginning. "You want to help her?" "I do. But I know it's a lot to ask. Our lives are already complicated. Adding more people to the mix might be too much." Marcus thought about it for a moment. He thought about the night he had kicked in that door, the fear in Maria's eyes, the determination in Lily's. He thought about how far they had all come, how much they had all healed. "What's her name?" he asked. "Sophia, and her daughter is called Emma. Tell Sophia and Emma that they're welcome here for as long as they need. We have room and we have love to spare." He kissed Maria's forehead gently. "That's what we do now. We help people. It's who we are." Maria's eyes shone with gratitude and love. "Have I told you lately how much I love you? You might have mentioned it once or twice, but I don't mind hearing it again." She kissed him then, soft and sweet, a promise of forever. And Marcus kissed her back, this woman who had given him a second chance at life, who had helped him believe that he was worthy of love. Sophia and Emma arrived the following week. They were frightened and uncertain, jumping at sudden sounds, flinching when Marcus entered a room. It reminded him painfully of those first days with Maria and Lily, and he made a conscious effort to move slowly, to speak softly, to give them space. Lily took Emma under her wing immediately, recognizing a kindred spirit. She showed the younger girl around the house, introduced her to Daniel, and promised that everything was going to be okay. Emma listened with wide eyes, wanting to believe, but not quite able to. Sophia was harder to reach. She was suspicious of kindness, convinced that there had to be a catch, that no one would help her without wanting something in return. Maria understood. She had felt the same way once. So she gave Sophia time, gave her space, offered friendship without pressure. It took weeks, but slowly Sophia began to open up. She told Maria about her life, about the man who had hurt her, about the years of fear and isolation. Maria shared her own story, the darkness she had escaped, the light she had found. And gradually, Sophia began to heal. Marcus watched it all happen, this beautiful cycle of compassion and recovery. His family had grown, not through biology, but through choice. They had created something special, a community of survivors who lifted each other up, who refused to let the darkness win. The team embraced Sophia and Emma just as they had embraced Maria and Lily. Sunday dinners became more crowded, more chaotic, more joyful. The warehouse that had once been a refuge for broken warriors became a sanctuary for broken families, a place where healing happened one meal, one story, one act of kindness at a time. Lily grew up, went to college, became a social worker who specialized in helping survivors of domestic violence. She married a kind man named James who adored her, and they had 2 children of their own, a boy and a girl who called Marcus Grandpa and climbed all over him whenever they visited. Daniel followed in his father's footsteps, joining the Navy after high school, determined to serve his country as Marcus had served. Marcus was proud and terrified in equal measure, knowing the dangers his son would face, trusting the training and values they had instilled in him. Sophia eventually moved out on her own, finding the courage to build an independent life. But she and Emma remained close to the family, forever grateful for the second chance they had been given. Emma grew up to become a teacher, passing on the kindness she had received to the next generation. Maria and Marcus grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. The trials they had faced had forged a bond that nothing could break. They argued sometimes, disagreed often, but always came back to each other, always found their way home. On their 20th wedding anniversary, the team threw them a party at the warehouse. All the people they loved were there. Lily and James and the grandchildren, Daniel home on leave, Sophia and Emma, the veterans who had become family. Danny gave a toast, his voice rough with emotion. 20 years ago, a little girl ran into this place looking for help, and she found a bunch of broken warriors who didn't know they needed saving. She and her mother taught us that courage isn't just about fighting battles. It's about opening your heart, taking chances, choosing to love, even when it's terrifying. He raised his glass to Maria and Marcus, to the couple who showed us all what family really means. Here's to 20 more years of love, laughter and Sunday dinners that never end on time. Everyone cheered and drank, and Marcus looked around at the faces of the people he loved. He thought about the man he had been that rainy night, the hollow shell who had thought his best days were behind him. He thought about the little girl with terrified eyes who had asked him for help, who had given him a reason to live again. He had made a promise that night, a promise to save her mother. But Lily had saved him too, in ways she would never fully understand. She had reminded him that hope was possible, that healing was possible, that love was possible. She had brought him home. Later that evening, after the party had wound down and most of the guests had gone home, Marcus found himself alone on the roof of the warehouse. The stars were bright overhead, and the city stretched out below him, full of lives and stories and struggles he would never know. Maria found him there, climbing up through the skylight just as Danny had done so many years ago. She settled beside him and took his hand. "Penny for your thoughts," she said. Marcus smiled. "Just thinking about how lucky I am, how different my life would be if Lily hadn't walked through that door. She didn't just walk, she ran, crying and terrified and braver than anyone I've ever known." Maria squeezed his hand. "She gets that from her father. She gets it from both of us." He turned to look at his wife, at the woman who had become his whole world. "Thank you, Maria." "For what?" "For letting me in. For giving me a chance. For building this life with me." He brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I was so afraid of failing you, of disappointing you. But you believed in me anyway." Maria cupped his face in her hands, looking into his eyes with all the love she had carried for him over the years. "You have never disappointed me, Marcus Cole. Not once. You are the most extraordinary man I have ever known." They kissed then, on that rooftop under the stars, two people who had found each other against all odds. And Marcus felt, as he always did when he was with her, that everything was going to be okay, because that was the truth of it in the end. Life was hard and painful and full of loss, but it was also beautiful and precious and full of love. The darkness never fully went away, but neither did the light. And as long as you had people to share the journey with, you could face whatever came next. Marcus Cole had learned that lesson late in life, but he had learned it well. And he was grateful every single day for the little girl who had run through a storm to find him, who had looked into his eyes and seen not the broken warrior he thought he was, but the hero she needed him to be. She had made him believe again. She had brought him home. The end. But of course it wasn't really the end. Life doesn't work that way. There are no neat conclusions, no final chapters, no moments where everything stops and you can say, this is complete. Life goes on, messy and unpredictable and wonderful. Lily's children grew up hearing stories of their grandfather's heroism. They would sit in the warehouse on Sunday evenings, surrounded by aging warriors, listening with wide eyes as tales of courage and sacrifice unfolded. They learned that heroes were not perfect, that they carried scars and doubts and regrets. But they also learned that heroes kept going anyway, that they chose to love and protect and serve no matter the cost. Daniel came home from the Navy after 10 years, decorated and proud, ready to start a new chapter. He joined Trident Security Solutions, working alongside the men who had helped raise him. And when Danny retired, passing the torch to a new generation, Daniel was there to carry it forward. Maria continued to volunteer, to advocate, to fight for women and children who needed protection. She testified before Congress about domestic violence, helped establish new shelters in underserved communities, and trained countless professionals in trauma-informed care. She was tireless, driven by the memory of her own escape, by the gratitude she felt for the second chance she had been given. And Marcus, surrounded by the family he had built, found peace at last. The nightmares still came sometimes, but they were gentler now, less vivid, less painful. He dreamed of Yasmin Ahmadi not as a dying child, but as a smiling girl who waved to him from a distance, who seemed to be telling him that everything was okay. Fatima continued to visit, spending holidays with them, becoming the grandmother that Lily's children adored. She brought stories of Yasmin, kept her daughter's memory alive, and honored her through acts of kindness and compassion. On Marcus's 60th birthday, the team gathered for one final mission, surprising him with a party that brought together everyone who had ever been part of his story. Former teammates, rescued families, grateful clients, they all came to celebrate the man who had touched so many lives. Danny gave another toast, this one quieter, more reflective. When I met Marcus 35 years ago, he was the toughest, most stubborn, most dedicated warrior I had ever known. But he was also the loneliest. He had walls around his heart that no one could breach. He paused, looking around the room at all the faces gathered there. Then life happened, pain happened, loss happened. And instead of letting it destroy him, Marcus transformed it into something beautiful. He built a family, he built a community, he built a legacy of love that will outlast us all. Danny raised his glass, his voice thick with emotion. To Marcus Cole, my brother, my friend, my hero. May your remaining years be filled with the peace you've earned and the love you deserve. Everyone drank, and Marcus felt tears streaming down his face. Tears he did not bother to hide. He looked at Maria beside him, at Lily and Daniel and their children, at the men who had fought beside him and the families they had saved together. He thought about the night that had started it all, the rain and the thunder and the little girl bursting through the door. He thought about the choice he had made to help her, the promise he had kept, the journey that had followed. It had been the best decision of his life. Thank you all, he managed to say, his voice rough. For everything, for believing in me, for being my family. I couldn't have done any of this alone. Lily stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, holding him tight. That's the point, Dad, she whispered. None of us can do it alone. That's why we have each other. And Marcus held his daughter, the little girl, who had saved his life by asking him to save hers, and he knew that she was right. We are not meant to walk this road alone. We are meant to find each other, to lift each other up, to carry each other through the darkness until we find the light. Marcus Cole had learned that lesson the hard way, but he had learned it well. And as he stood there, surrounded by the people he loved, he felt something he had thought was lost forever. He felt whole. He felt home. Many years later, when Marcus Cole finally passed from this world to whatever comes next, his funeral was held at the warehouse where it had all begun. Hundreds of people came to pay their respects. Veterans and survivors, politicians and priests, ordinary people whose lives he had touched in ways both large and small. The flag-draped coffin sat at the front of the room, surrounded by photographs and medals and memories. Maria sat in the front row, her silver hair pulled back, her face lined with age, but still beautiful, still strong. Lily sat beside her, holding her mother's hand, while Daniel stood at attention nearby, wearing his dress uniform. Danny gave the eulogy, his voice breaking several times as he spoke. He told the story of a warrior who had become a healer, a broken man who had learned to love again. He spoke of courage and compassion, of sacrifice and service, of the light that Marcus had brought into the darkness. Marcus used to say that he was no hero, Danny concluded. He said he was just a guy who did his job, but Marcus was wrong. He was a hero, not because of the medals on his chest or the battles he won, but because of the lives he changed, the families he saved, the love he gave. He turned to face the coffin standing at attention, delivering a final salute. "Rest easy, brother." Mission accomplished. The crowd followed suit, veterans and civilians alike, all of them paying tribute to a man who had given everything he had in service to others. Later, after the ceremony, Lily found herself alone in the warehouse. The guests had gone, the chairs had been put away, and the sun was setting over San Diego, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. She stood at the window, looking out at the city her father had loved, remembering the night she had first come here. She had been so scared, so desperate, so certain that no one would help, and then Marcus had knelt down, had looked into her eyes, had made her a promise that he kept. "I miss you, Dad," she whispered to the empty room. "I miss you so much." A hand touched her shoulder, and she turned to find her own daughter standing there, a teenager with dark hair, and her grandfather's determination in her eyes. "Mom? Are you okay?" Lily smiled through her tears. "I'm okay, sweetheart. Just saying goodbye." Grandpa was the best, wasn't he? Yes, he was, the absolute best. They stood together, mother and daughter, watching the sun disappear below the horizon. And Lily thought about everything her father had taught her, about courage and compassion, about love and sacrifice, about never giving up, no matter how hard things get. She would carry those lessons forward. She would pass them on to her children, and they would pass them on to theirs. The legacy of Marcus Cole would live on, not in medals or monuments, but in the hearts of the people who loved him. Because that was the thing about heroes. They didn't die when their bodies gave out. They lived on in the lives they had changed, the hope they had inspired, the love they had given. Marcus Cole had saved a lot of lives in his 68 years on this earth, but the life he had saved most completely was his own. And he had done it by opening his heart to a scared little girl who had run through a storm, looking for someone to help her, looking for a hero, looking for home, looking for her dad.